The rain fell in relentless sheets over Prague, the cobblestone streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights. The Vltava River churned restlessly in the distance, its waters reflecting the golden spires of the city's ancient skyline. Nestled among the Gothic architecture and Baroque facades stood the Aureum Prague, a luxurious hotel that blended old-world charm with modern opulence. The rain fell in relentless sheets over Prague, the cobblestone streets glistening under the dim glow of streetlights. The Vltava River churned restlessly in the distance, its waters reflecting the golden spires of the city's ancient skyline. Nestled among the Gothic architecture and Baroque facades stood the Aureum Prague, a luxurious hotel that blended old-world charm with modern opulence. Its towering glass entrance shimmered like a beacon, promising warmth and exclusivity to those who could afford it. Tonight, though, it would become the stage for something far more profound than a five-star stay. Julian Marks pulled the hood of his weathered jacket tighter around his face, the damp fabric clinging to his shoulders. His sneakers, scuffed and muddy from the trek through Old Town, squelched faintly as he stepped into the lobby. At 38, Julian was a man of contrasts. Sharp hazel eyes that could pierce through pretense, a lean frame that carried both strength and weariness, and skin, a rich brown, that told a story of heritage stretching across continents. Tonight, he wore none of the tailored suits or polished loafers that defined his public persona. Instead, he was just a man in a faded jacket, a backpack slung over one shoulder, seeking shelter from the storm. The lobby of the Aureum Prague was a masterpiece. Marble floors veined with gold, chandeliers dripping with crystal, and plush velvet furniture that whispered wealth. The air smelled faintly of lavender and leather, a curated scent meant to soothe the elite. Julian paused just inside the threshold, shaking off the rain, and approached the front desk. Behind the polished counter stood a young woman in a crisp navy uniform, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Karolina. She glanced up from her computer, her blue eyes narrowing as they swept over him. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and Julian could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. Who is this man? And why is he here? "Good evening," Julian said, his voice calm but firm, carrying the faintest trace of a British accent honed by years abroad. "I'd like a room for the night." Karolina's gaze lingered on his muddy shoes, then flicked to his soaked jacket. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone clipped, as if she already knew the answer. "No," Julian replied, adjusting the strap of his backpack. "But I'd like to check availability." She tapped a few keys on her computer, her movements deliberate, almost performative. "I'm afraid we're fully booked," she said without looking up. "Perhaps you'd have better luck at one of the hostels near the station." Julian tilted his head, studying her. He knew the hotel wasn't full. His company's internal system, accessible via an app on his phone, showed 23 vacant rooms as of an hour ago. He'd built the Aureum chain from the ground up, turning it into a global empire with 47 properties across 5 continents. Prague was one of his favorites, a jewel in the crown. He'd come here unannounced, as he often did, to see the operation through the eyes of a stranger. But this was a test he hadn't expected to fail so quickly. "I'd like you to check again," he said, his voice steady but edged with something harder now. Karolina sighed, a sound that carried more irritation than exhaustion. "Sir, I've already told you, we don't have any rooms. This is a luxury establishment, and we cater to a certain clientele." Her eyes flicked over him again, and the unspoken judgment hung heavy in the air. You don't belong here. Julian felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a mix of anger and resignation. He'd faced this before, countless times in fact, in boardrooms where his ideas were dismissed until a white colleague echoed them, in upscale stores where security shadowed him while others browsed freely, even in his own hotels, on rare occasions like this, when he shed the trappings of wealth to walk among the ordinary. Racism wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was a quiet sneer, a closed door, a lie about availability. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, unlocking it with a swipe. "Call your manager," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Karolina hesitated, her fingers hovering over the desk phone. "That won't be necessary," she said, forcing a tight smile. "If you'd please leave, I'd be happy to direct you to—" "Now," Julian cut in, his voice low but commanding. Her smile faltered, and she picked up the phone, murmuring something in Czech too soft for him to catch. Moments later, a man in a tailored suit emerged from a side office. His name tag read Pavel, General Manager. He was older, with graying hair and a practiced air of authority, but his expression softened into confusion as he took in the scene. "What seems to be the problem?" Pavel asked, glancing between Karolina and Julian. "Your employee says there are no rooms available," Julian said, crossing his arms. "I'd like you to confirm that." Pavel shot Karolina a quick look before turning to the computer. His fingers moved swiftly over the keys, and his brow furrowed. "That's odd," he muttered. "We have plenty of availability tonight. I apologize for the mix-up, sir. We can certainly accommodate you." Karolina's face flushed red, her hands clenching at her sides, but she said nothing. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. "Before you check me in, there's something you should know." He slid his phone across the desk, the screen displaying his company profile. Julian Marks, founder and CEO, Aureum Hospitality Group. "I'm not just a guest." Pavel's eyes widened, and Karolina's mouth dropped open, the color draining from her face. The air in the lobby seemed to thicken, the distant hum of the rain outside amplifying the silence between them. "Mr. Marks," Pavel stammered, stepping back as if the counter might shield him from the weight of his mistake. I had no idea. Please let me—" "Stop," Julian said, raising a hand. "I don't want apologies. I want answers. Why was I turned away?" Pavel glanced at Karolina, who stared at the floor, her earlier confidence evaporating. "It was a misunderstanding," he said weakly. "A clerical error." "No," Julian said, his voice cutting through the excuse like a blade. "It wasn't, and we're going to deal with this right now." The lobby of the Aureum Prague felt smaller now, the grandeur shrinking under the weight of Julian's presence. The chandeliers still sparkled, the marble still gleamed, but the air buzzed with unease. Karolina stood frozen behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edge of the desk. Pavel, the general manager, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his polished exterior cracking like thin ice. Julian Marks, still dripping from the rain, loomed larger than his modest frame suggested, not through volume, but through the quiet intensity that radiated from him. "Mr. Marks," Pavel began again, his voice a careful blend of deference and panic. "I assure you, this is not how we operate. If you'll allow me to—" "Enough," Julian said, his tone sharp enough to silence the room. He pulled off his hood, revealing a head of close-cropped curls and a face that carried both exhaustion and resolve. "I didn't come here for excuses. I came here to see what my hotels are really like. Not the polished reports I get in board meetings, but the truth. And this? He gestured toward Karolina, then the empty lobby around them. This is unacceptable. Karolina's eyes flicked up, a spark of defiance flaring briefly before she dropped her gaze again. I didn't know who you were, she muttered, barely audible. Julian's laugh was short and bitter. And that's the problem, isn't it? You didn't know who I was, so you assumed I didn't belong. Tell me, Karolina, what was it? The jacket? The shoes? Or was it something else? He let the question hang, heavy and pointed, daring her to answer. She didn't. Instead, her lips pressed into a tight line, and she stared at the counter as if it might swallow her whole. Pavel stepped in, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Sir, she's new. She didn't mean any harm. It was a mistake. A lapse in judgment. I'll handle it personally. Julian turned to him, his hazel eyes narrowing. A mistake? No, Pavel. A mistake is forgetting to restock the minibar. This was a choice. And it's not just her. It's the culture here that let her think that choice was okay. He tapped his phone screen, pulling up the hotel's occupancy data again. 23 empty rooms, and I'm told to try a hostel. Why? Because I didn't look the part? Pavel opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly at a loss. The truth was undeniable, and Julian wasn't here to let it slide. Get me the shift logs, Julian said, his voice low but commanding. Every employee on duty tonight. I want names, positions, and their training records. Now. Pavel hesitated, then nodded quickly. Of course, sir. I'll have them brought to the office. Please, if you'd like to wait there, it's more comfortable. No, Julian said, crossing his arms. We're doing this here, in the open. If your staff can judge me in this lobby, they can face me here too. Pavel swallowed hard and hurried off, disappearing behind a door marked Staff Only. Karolina remained, her posture rigid, as if bracing for a storm. Julian leaned against the counter, his eyes scanning the lobby. A lone porter lingered near the entrance, pretending to adjust a stack of luggage, while a housekeeper peeked out from behind a potted fern, her curiosity outweighing her discretion. Word was spreading, Julian knew. Good. Let them whisper. Let them wonder. Minutes later, Pavel returned with a tablet in hand, its screen glowing with a list of names and files. Here, sir, he said, handing it over with a slight tremble. Everyone on shift tonight. Julian took the tablet and scrolled through the list. 10 employees, from the concierge to the night cleaner. He tapped Karolina's name first, pulling up her profile. Hired 3 months ago, basic training completed, no prior complaints. He glanced at her. 3 months isn't new, Karolina. You've had time to learn the standards. So why didn't you? She flinched, her voice barely a whisper. I just thought... You thought I couldn't afford it, Julian finished for her. Or maybe you thought I'd ruin the vibe. Which was it? Her silence was answer enough. Julian set the tablet down and straightened, his mind already racing ahead. This wasn't just about one rude encounter. It was a symptom of something deeper, something he'd feared might lurk beneath the polished surface of his empire. He'd built Aureum to be a sanctuary, a place where luxury meant dignity for everyone. But if a man like him, its own founder, could be turned away, what did that mean for others? For the guests who didn't have a CEO title to flash? Pavel, Julian said, turning to the manager. Call a staff meeting. Everyone on duty right now. No exceptions. Sir, it's nearly midnight, Pavel protested weakly. Some of them are. I don't care if they're scrubbing toilets or asleep in the break room, Julian snapped. Get them here. We're fixing this tonight. Pavel nodded and scurried off again, barking orders into a walkie-talkie. Within 10 minutes, The lobby began to fill with bleary-eyed employees, porters in their pressed uniforms, housekeepers clutching brooms, a bartender still wearing an apron. They formed a loose semicircle around the front desk, their faces a mix of confusion and apprehension. Karolina stayed behind the counter, isolated but inescapable. Julian stepped forward, his presence commanding their attention without a word. He let the silence stretch, feeling the weight of their stares, some curious, some fearful, a few resentful. Then he spoke. "My name is Julian Marks," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "I founded this company 12 years ago with a promise that every person who walks through these doors would be treated with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. Tonight, that promise was broken." He paused, letting the words sink in. The porter by the luggage shifted uncomfortably. The housekeeper with the fern dropped her gaze. "I came here as a guest," Julian continued, "not as your boss. I didn't announce myself because I wanted to see the truth. And the truth is, I was turned away, not because we were full, but because someone decided I didn't belong. That's not just a personal insult. It's a betrayal of everything Aureum stands for." He pointed to Karolina, who flinched under the collective scrutiny. "This isn't about her alone. It's about all of you. It's about a system that let her think that was okay. And it's about what we do next." The staff exchanged glances, uncertainty rippling through them. Julian took a deep breath, his mind sharpening around a plan. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was an opportunity. A reckoning, yes, but also a chance to rebuild something better. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "Starting tonight, every one of you is going back to training. Not the basics, the real stuff. How to see people, not stereotypes. How to serve with dignity, not judgment. And it's not stopping here. I'm taking this to every Aureum property worldwide. Because if this can happen to me, it's happening to others. Guests who don't have the power to call a meeting like this." A murmur ran through the group, a mix of surprise and unease. Julian held up a hand to silence them. "But first," he said, turning to Karolina, "you and I are going to have a conversation, not here, in private, because I want to understand why, and I want you to understand what's at stake." Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face, but she nodded mutely. Julian turned back to the group. "Meeting's over," he said. "Get back to work. We'll start fresh tomorrow." As the staff dispersed, whispering among themselves, Julian felt the weight of the night settle on his shoulders. This was only the beginning. The real work, the transformation, was still ahead, and it would demand everything he had. The rain had slowed to a drizzle outside the Aureum Prague, the soft patter against the glass doors, a stark contrast to the charged silence inside. Julian led Karolina through the lobby, past the curious stares of lingering staff, and into a small meeting room tucked behind the front desk. The space was utilitarian. White walls, a wooden table, a few chairs. But it felt claustrophobic under the weight of what was about to unfold. Julian gestured to a chair. "Sit," he said, his tone firm but not harsh. He took the seat across from her, setting his phone and the tablet with the shift logs on the table. Karolina perched on the edge of her chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting between the floor and Julian's face. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the hotel's heating system filled the void, a low drone that underscored the tension. Julian leaned back, studying her. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with sharp features softened by nervousness. Her uniform was pristine, her posture stiff, But there was something else there, something he couldn't quite place. Fear, shame, or something deeper. "Tell me why," Julian said finally, breaking the silence. "And don't say it was a mistake. I want the truth." Karolina swallowed, her fingers tightening until her knuckles whitened. I didn't mean to offend you," she started, her voice small. "I just—" "Stop," Julian interrupted, leaning forward. "Don't apologize yet. I don't want platitudes. I want to know what went through your head when you saw me walk in. What made you decide I didn't belong?" Her gaze dropped to the table, and for a long moment, she didn't answer. Julian waited, letting the silence press on her. He'd learned patience over the years. Running a company like Aureum required it. But this was different. This wasn't about business strategy or profit margins. This was personal. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't look like our usual guests." Julian's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Go on." She hesitated, then continued, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Most people who come here, they're in suits or designer coats, or they've got drivers dropping them off. They've got this air about them. You walked in alone, wet, with a backpack, and I thought—" She stopped, biting her lip. "You thought I was lost," Julian finished for her, "or that I couldn't afford it." Karolina flinched, but she nodded. "Yes, and I don't know. It's stupid, but I've seen people like that before. Tourists who wander in, ask for a room, then complain about the prices. I didn't want to deal with it. Not tonight." Julian leaned back, processing her words. There was honesty there, raw and unpolished. But it wasn't the full story. He could feel it. "That's part of it," he said. "But there's more. I saw the way you looked at me. Not just my clothes, but me. My face, my skin. Don't lie to me, Karolina. I've seen that look too many times." Her eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. "No, it wasn't—" She stopped herself, then took a shaky breath. "Okay, maybe it was. Not on purpose, I swear. It's just where I'm from. We don't see many people like you in places like this. I didn't think. I just reacted." Julian felt a familiar ache settle in his chest, a mix of anger and fatigue. "Where you're from," he repeated. "Where's that?" "A small town," she said, her voice softening. "Outside Ostrava. Coal country. Everyone looks the same, talks the same. I moved to Prague for this job, to get out. But I guess I brought some of that with me." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "I'm not racist. I don't hate anyone. I didn't know better." Julian held her gaze, searching for the lie. He didn't find it. What he saw was ignorance, not malice, a distinction that mattered, even if it didn't erase the sting. "You didn't know better," he echoed. "But you've been here 3 months. You've had training. You've seen guests from all over the world. Black, brown, Asian, everything. So why didn't you learn?" She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know. I thought I had. But when you walked in, it was like my brain switched off. I saw what I expected to see, not what was there." Julian sat back, his mind turning over her words. It wasn't an excuse. It couldn't be. But it was an explanation. And it pointed to something bigger than Karolina, something woven into the fabric of the Aureum experience. If she could work here, wear the uniform, and still carry those biases. What about the others? What about the guests who didn't have his power to push back? Here's the thing, he said, his voice steady but laced with steel. You don't get a pass because you didn't know better. You're not a kid. You're an adult, in a job where your choices affect people. And tonight, you made me feel like I was less than human. Do you understand that? Karolina nodded, wiping her eyes. Yes. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I know you're sorry, Julian cut in. But sorry doesn't fix it. Actions do. So here's what's going to happen. You're not fired, not yet. But you're on probation, effective immediately. And you're going to help me fix this. Her head snapped up, confusion replacing the tears. Help you? How? Julian tapped the tablet, pulling up a blank document. We're rewriting the training program, not just for Prague, for every Aureum hotel, starting with you. You're going to tell me everything, every assumption you made, every thought that crossed your mind tonight. We're going to break it down, figure out where it came from, and build something better. Because if you can change, maybe others can too. Karolina stared at him, disbelief etched across her face. You want me to work with you? After this? Yes, Julian said. Because firing you is easy. Teaching you and everyone else is harder. And I don't build things to take the easy way out. She blinked, processing his words. I don't know if I can do that. You can, Julian said, standing. And you will, starting tomorrow. Meet me here at 8 a.m. Bring coffee. We've got work to do. He left her there, the door clicking shut behind him as he stepped back into the lobby. The staff had scattered, but the air still buzzed with the aftermath of the meeting. Julian pulled out his phone and dialed his COO, Elena Vasquez, who picked up on the second ring despite the late hour. Julian? Her voice was groggy but alert. What's wrong? Everything, he said, staring out at the rain-slicked street. And nothing I can't fix. I need you to pull every training manual we've got. We're tearing them apart and starting over. I'll explain in the morning. Elena paused, then sighed. This is why I don't sleep. Fine. I'll get it ready. You okay? Julian smiled faintly, the first real lightness he'd felt all night. Getting there. Talk soon. He hung up, his mind already racing ahead. This wasn't just about Karolina or Prague. It was about the soul of Aureum. And he'd fight for it, one hotel, one person, at a time. The sun rose over Prague in a blaze of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. Inside the Aureum Prague, the lobby hummed with its usual rhythm, guests checking out, porters wheeling luggage, the faint clink of china from the breakfast room. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching the city awaken. He'd barely slept, his mind too restless, too full of what lay ahead. At 8 a.m. sharp, Karolina appeared, clutching 2 steaming cups and a notebook. She looked different, less polished, more human. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair slightly askew, but there was a determination in her posture that hadn't been there the night before. Coffee, she said, setting 1 cup on the table where Julian had spread out a laptop and a stack of files. Black, like you asked. Thanks, Julian said, nodding toward the chair across from him. Sit. Let's get started. She hesitated, then sat, opening her notebook to a page filled with tight, hurried script. I wrote down what you asked for, she said, Everything I thought last night. It's not pretty. Good, Julian replied, taking a sip of his coffee. I don't want pretty. I want real. For the next 2 hours, they dissected her assumptions, line by line, word by word. The muddy shoes that screamed budget traveler, the backpack that didn't match the Louis Vuitton bags she was used to seeing, the skin tone that, in her small-town mind, didn't fit the image of wealth. Julian listened, occasionally jotting notes on his laptop, his expression unreadable. Karolina stumbled at first, her voice shaking. But as the minutes ticked by, she grew steadier, as if unburdening herself lightened the weight. It's not just me, she said at one point, her brow furrowing. I mean, I did it, but I've heard others, comments in the break room, little jokes, not mean, just thoughtless, like it's normal. Julian paused, his pen hovering over the page. That's what we're changing, he said. Normal doesn't get a free pass anymore. By noon, they had a rough outline. A new training module focused on unconscious bias, real-world scenarios, and accountability. Not the sanitized corporate version Julian had seen before, but something raw, practical, mandatory. He emailed it to Elena with a single line. This is the start. Roll it out everywhere. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind. Julian stayed in Prague, working from a suite he'd claimed on the top floor, not as a guest, but as a force of nature. He met with every employee, from the dishwashers to the concierge, asking questions, listening, pushing. Some resisted, their defensiveness bristling in clipped answers and folded arms. Others opened up, sharing stories of their own, moments they'd felt judged, or times they'd judged others without realizing it. Julian took it all in, refining the plan with each conversation. Word spread beyond Prague. Elena reported that managers at Aureum properties in Paris, London, and Barcelona were already adapting the new training, tweaking it for their teams. Social media buzzed with rumors, guests posting about something big happening at the chain, a few even praising the staff's newfound attentiveness. Julian monitored it all from his phone, a quiet satisfaction settling in. It wasn't perfect, not yet, but it was a beginning. A week later, he called a final meeting in the Prague lobby. The staff gathered again, their faces a mix of fatigue and curiosity. Karolina stood among them, no longer behind the counter, her probation a visible reminder of the stakes. Julian stepped forward, his voice carrying the same authority as before, but softer now, tempered by hope. We're not done, he said, meeting their eyes one by one. What happened here was a wake-up call, for me, for you, for every Aureum in the world. We're rebuilding how we treat people, starting with ourselves. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. But it's happening, and you're part of it. He paused, letting the words settle. I'm leaving tomorrow. Karolina's off probation. She's earned it. But this isn't over. I'll be back, and I'll be watching. Not just here, but everywhere. Because this isn't my hotel anymore. It's ours. And we're going to make it right. A murmur rippled through the group, some nodding, others exchanging glances. Julian stepped back, signaling the end, and the staff dispersed. Karolina lingered, approaching him hesitantly. Thank you, she said, her voice low, for giving me a chance. I didn't expect it. Julian looked at her, seeing not just the woman who'd turned him away, but someone who'd faced her flaws and fought to change. Don't thank me, he said. prove me right." She nodded, a small smile breaking through, and walked away. Julian turned to the window, the Vltava River glinting in the afternoon sun. His phone buzzed. Elena, with an update. The first training sessions in New York had just finished, and the feedback was promising. He smiled, but it was bittersweet. This was progress, yes, but the world outside these walls was still the same, full of closed doors and quiet judgments. He'd changed one corner of it, but how many more were out there? That night, he stood on his suite's balcony, the city sprawling before him. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain and history. He thought of his father, a Jamaican immigrant who'd worked double shifts to send him to school, and his mother, a teacher who'd drilled into him that dignity wasn't tied to a paycheck. They'd faced worse than a snub at a hotel desk, and they'd survived. Now, it was his turn to fight. Not just for himself, but for the strangers who'd never know his name. Julian finished his coffee and set the cup down, his mind already drifting to the next city, the next challenge. The Aureum Empire was his legacy, but this fight for respect, for equity, was his purpose, and it was far from over. As he stepped inside, the balcony door clicked shut behind him, the sound echoing faintly into the night. Below, the hotel glowed, a beacon of change in a world that still had so far to go. What happened next? That was up to everyone, staff, guests, even him, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough.